Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation's webinar. My name is Jason James. I'll be chairing it today as we talk about reimagining war. The relevance of that being that next month will be the 75th anniversary of Japan's surrender in the Second World War. But it's something that, of course, not many of us can remember directly. So today we'll be talking to two Japanese artists who both work on war-related issues. So today, as I mentioned, I'm in Cambridge, and we have two speakers who are both Japanese. Kazuma Obara is joining us from Japan. He's in fact in the gallery where he's just been installing his latest show, which is about to open. And Miyuki Okuyama is in Arnhem in the Netherlands. And I'll just briefly introduce the two of them. So Kazuma Obara is a photographer. They're in fact both photographers. And his work focuses on hidden victims. He did quite a lot of work on the Fukushima nuclear disaster after 2011, but he's also looked at victims of World War II, and I think that's mainly what he's going to be talking about today. He's won a number of awards, and just to mention one of them, he won the People category of the World Press Photo 2016. So then Miyuki Okuyama, also a photographer and photo book artist who lives in the Netherlands. She's done a lot of work on the descendants of Japanese people in countries that were colonized by the Japanese during the Second World War, such as Indonesia and the Philippines. And she too has won a number of prizes which are listed below. So this is the timeline. That was my introduction, 5 minutes, hopefully. About 20 minutes from each of the two speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A session, which will probably run on a little bit later than 1, but I'll certainly try and wrap it up by about 1:15 at the latest. So first of all, let's hear from Kazuma Obara in Tokyo.
Hi, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. My name is Kazuma Obara. It is great honor to be here to talk. And thank you very much to Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation for inviting me. And right now, as he said, I'm in Tokyo right now for the exhibition from tomorrow. So yeah, those are the one of our group exhibition. And the venue of group exhibition, the exhibition name, Reimagining War. 4 young Japanese photographers will show each war-related project. And today I will talk my long-term documentary project called Silent History Project. But before that, I would like to quickly introduce about myself, my personal history. And I share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah,
that's looking great.
Yes. So first, I just a little bit show where I was born and my personal history. I was born in Japan, in Iwate in 1985. So this year I will be 35 years old. And then I started going to university in Utsunomiya University, and I learned industrial sociology from 2003. And then afterwards, I worked in financial sector from 2009. And in 2011, the tsunami and nuclear explosion was happening in Japan, and I quitted my work and I started taking picture in the disaster area. And also, as I said, I was born in Iwate, so many of my friends are affected by tsunami and nuclear explosion. So my first work was about the nuclear explosion in Fukushima and disaster and tsunami area. And since then, I started taking picture. And 2015, I went to London for my MA in London College of Communication, and I learned photojournalism and documentary photography in 2015. And right now I'm in Tokyo, but just briefly for the exhibition, I'm in Osaka. And the picture left is my father and me in 2015. And the right is in 2016, my grandmother and me. She was, during the war period, she was around 15 and 60 years old. And I heard so many stories from the war period. But personally, of course, I'm 35 years old. So personally, I'm not directly to connect war story. And I just briefly show my previous work. This is story about Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. I try to focusing on hidden victims of society. Those are my big topic for my photographic work. And this is a portrait series from Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And I also visited Chernobyl from 2015. And this is project about the Bikini nuclear explosion in 1954. And this is a story of the surfers in Fukushima Sea. And I'm continue to taking picture of surfer in Fukushima Sea from 2011 till now. And also I'm start making documentary film called Blueprint. And this is one of the experiment to visualize the waves in Fukushima. I'm using all technique about the cyanotype and making the visual to change the view of the sea in Fukushima. And I'm also doing the project about COVID-19, and I'm visiting the place where the patient were staying. And right now I try to explain my project about silent histories. And before starting my main topic, I just want to briefly explain the background of my project. So from 2014, I studied the project about the victims of aerial bombing by US. There's some notes, but during the aerial bombing, the aerial bombing killed 330,000 Japanese and injured 430,000. And it is told more than 200 different cities were bombed. And because of this bombing, many children became handicapped persons and became orphan. And those children are trying to hide from the public for almost 70 years after the end of World War II because of the, bullying, and the society ignores those handicapped person. So many people try to hide from the public, and those personal history were completely visible from the society. So, and by the accident, I met one of the victims in Osaka, and I tried to visualize those children's history using found images and using propaganda magazine. And I tried to understand why they have to hide from the public and what was the scar of those people. And I tried to capture their behavior in the public space. They literally tried to hide their handicap in the public space. So it was quite difficult to distinguish who is handicapped person and or not. And 2014, this was my first topic about World War II. And in this time, I focusing on our victim side. But from 2015, when I went to London, I start thinking about our Japanese invasion side during World War II. And there was some, the big event for me. And the first big event was happened March 2015. Well, my photographer's friend in Clapham South, I lived in Clapham South, and he told me his grandfather was imprisoned in Hong Kong. And first my reaction was, why his grandfather was imprisoned in Hong Kong? There was no information about Hong Kong during war period. There was no information in history class. So I purely questioned why your grandfather was there. And slowly, I start understanding what I'm missing during our school days. And later on, I visited Japanese textbook museum in Tokyo, and I tried to research the textbook for the history class from 1950 till 2000. And literally there was really limited information was there. And it is quite difficult for Japanese students to learn, especially versus UK, versus Netherlands, and versus Australia. So some very big topic like Thai-Burma railway stories, those are mentioned 2 or 3 lines, but almost nothing in the textbook. And in my experience in history class, the teacher told me this period from 1940 till post-war period, we have to skip because this is not important period for university entrance exam. So I just run a little bit, but just a little bit. So those are really, affect to our knowledge for Japanese people. And there was another big thing, so is what's happened in 2015 in Osaka. There was a museum about war history, and this museum is public museum organized by public Osaka City and Osaka Prefecture. And initial ideas of this museum was try to bring 2 different aspects of war story. One is our aggression side, and another is our victim side. But 2015, our local government gave some pressure to museum, and the political person told the museum, this is not good for Japanese people to learn. So actually, literally, the politician decided to renew this museum. And from 2015, our aggression side was removed. And right now we can only see the exhibition about bombing in Osaka. So we can only learn about our victim story, not our aggression side. And 2016, I visited Singapore, and I was also shocked. I visited Shonan Gallery in Singapore, and there was so many stories about the Japanese aggression and massacre in Singapore during war period. And I started thinking about how the national narrative has been shaped for 70 years after the end of World War II in all countries where Japan invaded, and what is missing history in each country, and why we are missing and how, and what is consequences of this was my first question. And I tried to analyze one by one. And 2017, I started visiting some of the countries where Japanese Imperial Army invaded. And really first place I visited was Kotabaru. And about 1 hour before Pearl Harbor, Japanese Imperial Army invaded Malaysia. And that information was also, quite new for me. And I visited there, and I noticed there was a pill box in the coast 2 or 3 years ago, but because of the erosion, right now it was the pill box is sinking to the sea. So the natural, the one of the aspects to not to see the history was the nature. So I just keep taking picture of the waves in Kotabaru. And there was another things from my research. There is a Puru jail in Kuala Lumpur. And this jail was built by British in 19th. But during our occupation period, we used that jail for prison. So the American people and British and Australian people are imprisoned in that jail. And I tried to focusing on the Google Earth from 1980 till 2000. And this, like this shape, why each building is a jail. But if you follow one by one, it was disappeared from Google Earth. And the reason was the left picture is groundbreaking ceremony in 2017. And as you can see, this is a text from the newspaper. The building was built, the jail was bought by Mitsui Fudosans, and Japanese companies start building the shopping mall. After destroying the jail, the Mitsui Fudosan started building the shopping mall. So one of the aspects that we can control the changes of the history. So Japanese company, maybe they don't know the history, I don't know, but they just destroyed our historical memory. And this is, the blueprint. And there's another aspect, but we cannot see the history. Sorry. Yeah, this one. So when I visited Malaysia, there was a place where the massacre was occurred by Japanese Imperial Army. And this history is quite complicated, but this village called Titi, and this village was for Chinese people. And right after the massacre, Japanese Imperial Army burned all village. So right now there's nothing. There's only one, the building in the outskirts of the village. But there were so many housing during war period, but Japanese Imperial Army burned. And right now, the felt that this is a company to develop the plantation, start making the plantation on this area. And there's so many details, but I don't have lots of time, so I just skip. But I'm going to the next. And this is a place where one of the surviving victims lived right now. And during this project, I visited so many countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Australia, Britain, and the Netherlands. And this is a picture from Arnhem, where Miyuki lives right now. And this is a place for the pensioner, especially for the veteran of the soldier who used to fight against Japan. And I tried to meet one of the survivors to interview and to take portrait, but I was not accepted by one of the people, but I asked him to take a picture of his room. And finally, I could take a picture of his room, but there was no personal contact. So I enter the room and I see that, the picture from maybe the grandson and a family portrait, but I don't know who is that, and I don't know the context. And in the slide I show what is the consequence of the history that the reason. Where is that? As I said, once I tried to meet one of the survivors who fought against Japanese Imperial Army, I was ignored. And one of the reasons was I was a young Japanese man. And one of the organizations tried to contact the surviving victims, but the organizer was really concerned. My face as young Japanese man tried to trigger his trauma when he fight against Japanese people. So as you might know, many surviving victims still have trauma and try to avoid to remember that period. And because of that reason, still I cannot meet some of the survivors. And that experience was really big for me. And that was, the first experience for me. I really connected to war in my level. I didn't kill anybody, but still, I'm part of the history, and I, as Japanese, affect something to the people in Netherlands. That was really big for me, and I start thinking about, the presence of me in that place. So, sorry. So next one. Yeah, next. Yeah, this one. Yeah, and this is one of the ceremony in Netherlands, and this ceremony was for the people who died in so-called hell ship. When the POW prisoner was sent from, for example, Singapore to the other place, Japanese Imperial Army used ship, but those ships were hit by the bombing by US, and many of those prisoners died in the sea. And I tried to document this ceremony, but actually some of my really good friends who are also imprisoned when she was young, she suggested me not to be there, because again, my presence as Japanese might not good for some people, maybe a few people, we don't know. But, still, people might not be happy to see Japanese people in this ceremony. So I know this is really sensitive topic. So I don't want to disturb anybody in the ceremony. So I try to keep the distance with this topic. And one day before the ceremony, I visited this place, and two guys were preparing the chair for this ceremony. And I just took the picture of this ceremony one day before the ceremony. So I think this is, one of the consequences. If we try to do some different approach to the history, I might be able to be there, but still some people might know. Every second Tuesday in every month from 1993, some of the surviving victims in Indonesia in POW camp doing the demonstration in front of Japanese embassy in Den Haag to get the apology from Japanese government. It is happening still right now. And I think we seriously, I thought it's better for us to think seriously because of our poor education or because of our lack of knowledge. Still, people might struggle to this situation. So I really think we have to think about ourselves as Japanese people. So still I have time, a little bit more. And then, so go next, please. There's portrait, yeah. So then I start thinking to include myself as Japanese because my presence still affect to the, this topic. So I try to include myself into this project. I don't know this is necessary, but I try to include myself as Japanese people. So this is portrait of the picture, and actually he passed away 2 years ago, but he worked in Thai-Burma Railway to build the railway. And from this portrait list, I try to stand in front of the person. So, in the right portrait, I'm standing in front of the this guy, and he was seeing me. And the camera was next to the people, and I have a remote shutter. So during this portrait session, we are really standing each other. So he's seeing me, and I just took the picture. This is one of the way to include myself in the picture. I don't know this does work, but could you please to go next and next? Maybe you can see so many portrait cities. So this is also the Malaysian person, and his father was slave and forced to work in Thai-Birman Railway. But in front of him, again, I was standing and we are seeing each other. So, you know, the very straight portrait, the people is just seeing the camera lens. But I didn't want to do that. I don't know this portrait does work, but somehow I want to tell our presence of Japanese who might ignore the history of our invasion. So please go next and next. And maybe there's a landscape picture. Yes. So he's sorry. Could you go back? Yeah. So his father was so-called Korean guard who watched out the prisoner in POW camp in Indonesia or Singapore. Around 3,000 Korean people were sent to Southeast Asia to watch the prisoner of war. So those people are really facing prisoner of war in Indonesia, Singapore, and after the end of World War II, many Korean guards were executed because of that situation. And actually, because of that situation, his mother committed suicide in South Korea because after the end of World War II, that those who helped Japanese army were thought pro-Japanese people, and there was so many difficult situations the family faced. So finally, the mother died. So I visited so many countries and I faced many people and took the portrait to show our presence of the war. And sorry, please go to the next. And this is a landscape, and this is a place where his mother committed suicide. And somehow I try to include myself every picture. So there is an umbrella, and this is I don't know. This is interesting things, but at the moment I was really thinking about my identity as Japanese people, and because of some of the experience I faced during this project. So I try to include some of the fragment of my presence. Please go next. Yeah. And this was the portrait cities I'm exhibiting right now. And from 2018, I was supported by Dutch Embassy and tried to continue my project. And after doing that portrait project and landscape project, I slowly I could start taking very natural portrait. So, and right now I try to take normal portrait series in Netherlands. So those are maybe you can show some of the picture, and maybe I can finish my presentation.
Great. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I took a lot. Sorry.
It's fine. We just scroll through those. Right, let's hear from Miyuki Okuyama in the Netherlands.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Miyuki Okuyama, and thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you, and also thank you for Daiwa Foundation for inviting me and Kazuma to talk about our photo project. Well, my name is Miyuki Okuyama, and originally from northeast Japan, but I'm based in the Netherlands for now and working as a photographer here. And today, for this opportunity, I'm going to talk about my photo project titled "Dear Japanese Children of War." And yeah, this photo project is about Japanese, Dutch, Indonesian people born of war. Yeah, you might be thinking like, who's Dutch, Japanese, Indonesian people? But yeah, I will come to this detail in a moment. I think I have to begin with, I have to tell about some historical background, a little bit complicated. But today's Indonesia used to be called Dutch East Indies from 16th century to 1949. And during this 3.5 century of Dutch rule, there are people called Indo arose. They are not Indonesian, but I think they are same as Eurasians. And they are Christians, they speak Dutch language, and they did have Dutch citizenship. So when the war broke out in Asia in 1941 December, all the European men were sent to POW camps right after the capitulation, like Thai Burma Railway, like Kazuma explained. I think many of you have watched this film called The Railway Man. So that's the same place. And also European women and the children were also sent to civilian camps. But those Indo people, this mixed blood of European and Indonesian, men up to 49 years old, they were all taken as soldiers and sent to different POW camps all over Asia. Like, yeah, again, this Thai Burma Railway, or some went to Japan, in Nagasaki or Wakama-ishi, you know. And then, yeah, and what happened to these women who were left behind? They were considered by Japanese as agents, and it was just a matter of convenience. Yet simply because Japan could not establish enough camps for all women of Indo. And yeah, so those Indo women were left behind, and naturally they had to suffer financial problems because they had no financial support from their husbands or fathers, any male families. So in order to survive during the war, those Indo women had to work for Japanese militaries for 3.5 years. Yeah, and it's said about 300,000 Japanese men were stationed in Indonesia for 3.5 years. And those Indo women worked for Japanese at the office or like restaurant or cafes where the Japanese people used. And this situation naturally led to this kind of relationship between Indo woman and a Japanese man. Some are actually love relationships, but the rest were not necessarily. It was like yeah, it was out of necessity for economical support. Here, I just have to make it clear that those women I'm talking about are not comfort women. They had to serve as prostitute. Yeah, I hate the word to a numerous men. But this woman I'm talking about here, they only had one relationship during the war. And yeah, then naturally, yeah, what happened was numerous birth of Japanese children in Indonesia. And so yeah, today is the last day of July, and yeah, tomorrow August starts. So exactly 75 years ago, the war ended. But yeah, sadly, it didn't bring this peace for those people. And indeed, it was the beginning of independence war in Indonesia, and which continued for 4 years. And during this difficult time, Dutch people Indo people, they all had to repatriate to the Netherlands. I use the word repatriate, repatriation, but yeah, I'm not quite sure if this is the right word, because they never really knew this homeland, Netherlands. So yeah, that's why I was a bit hesitant to use the word repatriation. But anyway, they were kind of forced out of Indonesia, and they all came back here to the Netherlands. Their kind of home they never knew. And then, yeah, after the repatriation to the Netherlands, many mothers with Japanese children married to ex-POWs who were in different camps in Asia and came back from the war with heavy trauma. Well, like I told you earlier, most of the men were sent to camps, and that's why those women with Japanese children didn't have any other choice but to marry these men with POW experience. But yeah, I think it's not really difficult to imagine how those Japanese children appear to the eyes of ex-POWs. You can see the images. This is Rob when he was young. Does he look like Dutch? I don't think so, but yeah, he's more like a Japanese. So those children did trigger the traumatic pain for these ex-POWs, their fathers-in-law. So yes, for obviously for these reasons, Japanese children, many of them were abused by their fathers, physically, mentally, and sometimes also sexually. And those Japanese children had to grow up as taboo, shame, or family secret, because none of their families told them the truth that they were born from a relationship with a Japanese man. And during all those years, post-war years, these Japanese children were kept as a secret, family secret, and the family were trying to prevent the other people to find out what happened during the war, that the female member of family had a relationship with enemy. They absolutely wanted to hide this. So that's why these children didn't know for a long time that they were born as Japanese children. Just let me take a little sip. So these Japanese children were already quite old when they learned about their secret. Some were in their 40s or 50s or even close to 70 years old. Those people learned the truth that they were born between their mom and the Japanese soldiers. And yeah, it's also said, it's a curious fact that that being a family secret, it was a lot more painful and a lot more difficult compared to being enemies' children. I found it a really interesting fact. I'm gonna have to look into it, more psychological effect. And yeah, quite interesting to to hear from them when I interview them that all of them were kept a secret. And yeah, and sadly, yeah, most of them didn't have happy and innocent childhood. Actually, no research has been done about these Japanese war children. It's said about 800 of those Japanese children exist, but some say maybe thousands, and nobody really knows the exact number. No research has been done ever so far. Unlucky, yeah, unfortunately. And these children, of course, once they learn about their roots, they do want to, look for their Japanese fathers. And for that, from the mid-90s, one Japanese veteran, Mr. Okuyama, he was he was stationed in Java during the war, and after the war, he worked as a newspaper journalist, and he retired early at the age of 56. And then, since then, he was helping these Japanese children to trace their Japanese fathers, Japanese roots. And he took about 60 cases, and then he found about 20 cases, Japanese fathers. But yeah, even the Japanese fathers were found, yeah, majority of them had rather bitter end, because the Japanese family didn't want to accept the fact that their husband or their father had another child in Indonesia. So many failed to build good, close relationship with Japanese families. So yeah, that was kind of a brief background about those Japanese children. I also work as a volunteer for these people to look for their Japanese families. I think there are now close to 60, no, I mean close to 40 cases. 6 succeeded, but yeah, only how many cases? 3 cases been received positively by Japanese family. And yeah, the 30 some cases, they have too little information, and I'm afraid that there's not much we can do to look for their families in Japan. How much time do I have?
Well, I mean, we could give you a couple more minutes, but we should.
Okay, yeah, should wrap it up. Yeah, so yeah, it was because my family don't have really exact war trauma or war experience. My grandpa was 20, and then just before he was sent to the war ended. So I never had tangible war experience, but meeting these people became my very first tangible experience related to the war. So yes, it was kind of sad to hear their stories, but I'm really grateful that I had this chance to meet these people. So yeah, and these photos will be exhibited together with Kazuma's work in Tokyo starting tomorrow.
Okay. Can I ask you about the one that's on the screen?
Yes.
So there are 2 people here.
Right.
Twins?
They're twins.
Right, okay.
And they are looking for father called Watanabe, who was stationed in Sumatra, but yeah, their mother didn't tell about father, just the name, and he was working for kind of a restaurant, and that was it. So yeah, I think we're gonna have to close this case.
Yeah.
Sadly. Yeah.
Watanabe is rather a common name, unfortunately.
Very common name, yes. I found like this, I don't know, 50 names or so, and don't know which.
But for today, well, it's a pity we can't directly see your exhibition. We just caught a glimpse of it behind Obara-san there, and obviously shared. So we hope to see it, well, obviously in the Netherlands, but we'd hope to see it in the UK too, if possible. Yes, thanks very much for that.
We'll try.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll have to slow that down on our computers or play it back slowly or something. But thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So bye then, everybody.